Greetings from Wang from Shanghai Dingji University, Shanghai, China. I'm very glad to give a talk on my research. The correspondence of contrastive connectives in English and Chinese, a parallel corpus-based study. My talk is made up of the 5 parts here. In the first part, introduction, contrastive connectives. With the development of corpus linguistics and the availability of bilingual or multilingual parallel corpora for contrastive research, contrastive linguistics is gaining revitalization in recent years. Especially the advent of parallel corpora has provided an empirical basis for the comparison between languages by learning themselves to observing specific expressions of the same meaning in 2 languages compared. Up to now, the correspondence studies in this field has been confined to closely related, most often than not, European languages. Therefore, the primary study is an attempt to explore the correspondence between 2 genetically distinct languages, English and Chinese, by observing the behaviors of contrastive adverbial connectives, a particular kind of discourse connectives. According to some scholars, languages tend to differ in their repertoire of discourse connectives as well as in users' consciousness to signal discourse relationships. To date, there are many descriptions and classifications of discourse connectives, especially in English, but these descriptions and classifications are often in conflict, and the functions of different connectives tend to be described in rather vague terms, since many aspects of their use are poorly understood up till now. So it seems to be the case with contrastive connectives, a large and complex category which includes several subtypes such as adversatives and discursives. Particularly intriguing is the defining and the classifying of the relationship between contrast and concession. The problem is that few classifications are made based on empirical data in an attempt to analyze contrasting and concessive relations in detail. Well, for practical reasons, the present study will concentrate on one of these categories, adverbial connectives or conjuncts, once expressing contrastive relations, with a view to figuring out what kinds of relationship between contrastive connectives can be identified on the basis of the Georgian University parallel corpus, and reviewing the degrees of correspondence of English and Chinese contrastive connectives, with their patterns and functions included. The GTPC is a bidirectional English-Chinese parallel corpus built at Shanghai Jiaotong University, consisting of 12,340 text extracts from each language and their translations into the other language. Altogether, 15 English and 12 Chinese adverbial contrastive connectives, which occur at least 5 times in original languages, were examined in the GTPC. In my study, Table 1 shows their distribution in the English and Chinese original texts. As can be seen from Table 1, the table demonstrates A striking difference in the frequency of individual contrastive connectives signifies that both English and Chinese prefer a restricted set of contrastive connectives. However, it is not clear what picture emerges as to their English-Chinese correspondence relationships. In general, each of the discourse connectives can be translated in a number of ways in the other language. So, a useful starting point is to adopt the measure of the mutual correspondence for the correspondence as well as translation bias across languages compared. According to Teubert, 1999, MC is a simple statistical measure of the tendency or frequency with which a pair of items from two languages are translated into each other in a bidirectional translation corpus. MC can be calculated and expressed as a percentage by means of the following formula, where AT and BT are the frequencies of the compared items in the translations, and AS and BS their frequencies in the source texts. According to Teubert 1999, the MC value of two cross-linguistic items is a ratio between the number of mutual translations in a bidirectional translation corpus and the sum of their frequencies in the original texts expressed as a percentage. Furthermore, the measure of MC goes a long way in providing a revealing picture of the main paradigms or sets of expressions that are used to express a certain meaning in the languages compared. With main paradigms established, furthermore, it is possible to examine the correspondence in greater detail and explore the factors determining the choice of expressions in the two languages. To investigate the cross-linguistic correspondence of the English and Chinese contrastive connectives in the GTUPC, the MC values of all potential translation pairs which express the same contrastive relations in the English and Chinese texts and occur at least 5 times in the source texts were calculated. As shown in Table 2, the MC values of the varied pairs of contrastive connectives demonstrate a climb from 95.3% to 0.3%. No more than 3 pairs reach 50% and 3 exceed 20%. Only the topmost pair, at least, and 至少 has a high MC value, while the following 3 pairs, on the other hand, 另一方面 however 然而 on the contrary 相反 are used as translation equivalents in about half of the examples in the corpus. The remaining pairs have a low MC value of varied degrees. What emerges from Figure 1? Although the scale of MC values in Table 2 is instructive, it is more revealing to use the MC values systematically, treating them as indicators of cross-linguistic connector paradigms along with their subsets. As clearly illustrated in Figure 1, where the paradigms as well as their subsets are presented in parallel columns and linked by different lines representing the varied degrees of MC of individual connector pairs. What emerges from Figure 1 is what might be called paradigmatic subsets in the two languages, containing functionally similar connectives, some of which may be regarded as co-items, and some less common alternatives. Also, there seems to be no distinctive cutoff between allegedly adversative subset and concessive subset in the totality of contrastive paradigm across English and Chinese, despite the fact that it is not the case of the English and Swedish connectives in Teubert 2002. Even so, it should be noted that these subsets are just the quantitative clustering suggestive of the preferred translation equivalents of the English and Chinese connectives in the GTOPC. Only through an examination of the examples in the corpus may we make a further inquiry on the extent to which the 5 subsets represent functionally distinct categories. Therefore, however, 然而, the distinct pair with the highest MC value in this complex and fuzzy subset is to be addressed in the following. So, in the third part, methodology for further research, by adopting the 3-step approach proposed in Teubert 2002, our analysis will proceed as follows. First, we'll extract the English translation equivalents of 然而 from the corpus and examine their functions. The perspectives will then be reversed, departing from however. We'll examine its Chinese translation equivalents and functions. In the third step, reversing the respective again, we select some functionally distinct Chinese connectives disclosed in the previous step and examine the functions of the English translation equivalents. In the first subsection, we'll address these English translation equivalents of 然而. As shown in Table 3, 4 main functions can be distinguished in the corpus, including basic contrast, adversative, concession, and counter-expectation. The adversative function is most common, accounting for 75%, while counter-expectation function is rare, accounting for 5%. Now, let us reverse the perspective and examine the Chinese translation equivalents of however. As listed in Table 4, the picture emerging from the table is more complex than that displayed by 然而 in Table 3. Nevertheless, the 5 Chinese translation equivalents 不管多嘛，不管怎么说 and blue indicate the emergence of an additional function of however that is dismal. To establish the English correspondences of the newly revealed meanings and functions, it is necessary to reverse the perspective again and examine the English translation equivalents of the Chinese connectives expressing diversified meanings and functions. Well, for the sake of limited time and space, this can only be briefly explored by examining the English renderings of 2 items, 虽然如此 and 不管, as shown in Table 5. After a further stepwise analysis of the cross-linguistic correspondences of English and Chinese contrastive adverbial connectives, the functional categories, and the cross-linguistic corresponding patterns evidenced from the G2PC can be summarized in Figure 2. In general, the figure displays a symmetrical corresponding patterning of major functional categories of contrastive adverbial connectives across English and Chinese, including basic contrast, diversity, concession, counter-expectation, and dismal, with partly overlapping sets of connectives associated with each category. To sum up, the whole inquiry gives rise to the following conclusions. Firstly, the varied frequencies of contrastive adverbial connectives in the G2PC are suggestive of a cultural difference in marking conventions, in that the English writers tend to be more conscious and generous in marking contrastive relations in discourse explicitly, while Chinese writers often leave contrastive relations unmarked. Secondly, the systematic configuration of the MC values of contrastive connectives reveals 5 paradigmatic subsets within the contrastive paradigms of English and Chinese, with a basic contrast category as a core function, from which the others shed off in various ways depending on the contrasts implied. And finally, a further 3-step examination on however, 然而, lends itself to a symmetrical corresponding patterning of major functional categories of adverbial connectives across the 2 languages, indicating that the element of contrast seems to be lurking in all the functional categories. That's all for my report. Thanks for your attention.